Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another one of our ongoing series of free webinars produced here by the Military Aviation Museum. I'm Keegan Chetwin, the museum's director, and I wanted to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Tonight's guest is going to be talking about World War II from Finland's perspective. Definitely an interesting subject. We've had a lot of interest in finding out more about specifically how aviation was used during what are known as the Winter War and the Continuation War. So that's what we'll be looking at this evening. Before we get into that, however, this is a portion of World War II history that's often overlooked, but very interesting for us here at the museum because about 16 of the aircraft displayed in our collection actually have a connection to this particular conflict, making it an important part of interpreting the aircraft that we have on display. And it's not just our Soviet aircraft, aircraft produced in the UK, as well as aircraft produced here in the United States, would ultimately have a role to play in the Continuation War mostly, but also in the Winter War. Tonight it's my pleasure to introduce Juha Virola, who's joining us live from his home in Rauma in Finland, where it has just turned midnight. That is why we are doing this particular presentation at 5 p.m. instead of at 7 p.m. Because at 7 p.m. it would just be unreasonable to ask a guest speaker to be with us from 2 a.m. till 4 a.m. But Juha is an architect by profession and a historian by passion. He describes himself as a military history enthusiast, but he also has a love for aviation artwork that you'll see extending throughout his presentation. From this title slide onwards, Juha has created an incredible mix of period photography with more modern pieces of aviation artwork to convey the experience of Finland's aviators during the Second World War. With that said, Juha, we're ready for you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Keegan. Good evening, everybody. It's truly midnight in Finland. I will start with some background information about Finland and its history. I will then give you a short briefing about the Winter War in general and a more detailed briefing about the Winter War aviation. Then I will repeat this treat with the Continuation War. I will introduce the types of the aircraft used in those wars and some notable pilots as well. Finland is one of the Nordic countries and is located in the Northern Europe. Neighboring countries are Sweden, Norway, and Russia. Finland's population is about 5.5 million people. Area is approximately 130,000 square miles. Area is almost the same as the state of New Mexico. Population the same as in the state of Minnesota, and density of population equals that of state of Oregon. One might have heard that Finland is a country of 1,000 lakes, good education and welfare system, equal opportunities, happy people, I don't know about that, Finnish sauna, fast rally and Formula 1 drivers, heavy rock, and of course the Finnish sisu, which translates to something like guts, fighting spirit, strength of will, determination. About the history of Finland. From the late 13th century, Finland gradually became an integral part of the Kingdom of Sweden. After the Finnish War in 1809, Finland was annexed by the Russian Empire as the autonomous Grand Duchy of Finland. 1917, Russian Empire was seriously weakened by the burden of World War I, and there was some serious unrest among the Russian population. Tsar Nikolai II was removed from power in 1917 February Revolution. In October 1917 followed the so-called Bolshevik Revolution, where Bolsheviks took the power in Russia. Finland took the advantage of the situation, and in the turmoil of revolutions in Russia, Finnish government declared independence on the 6th of December 1917. Soon followed a civil war in Finland that lasted 3.5 months. Some words about the history of the Finnish Air Force. Devoted friend of Finland, a Swedish Count Erik von Rosen, donated Finland and its emerging armed forces an aircraft which landed in Vaasa on 6th of March 1918. Thus, the Finnish Air Force was born, and that aircraft was given designation F1. The blue swastika was von Rosen's personal good luck charm. The Finns adopted the symbol as the insignia of the newly founded Finnish Air Force. It was not derived from the Nazi swastika, nor it had any political implication at the time. Field Marshal Mannerheim is truly an important figure in Finnish history. Baron Carl Gustav Emil Mannerheim was a nobleman that made a career in the Imperial Russian Army, rising to the rank of Lieutenant General. He stayed loyal to the Tsar Nikolai II when Russian Empire fell during 1917 revolutions. Returning to Finland, he witnessed the declaration of independence and the rising tensions that led to the civil war in Finland in 1918. He was appointed the military chief of the Whites, leading them to the victory in the civil war. Eventually, in August 1944, Mannerheim was elected the president of Finland. One curiosity is that in 1960, US Post Office issued a 4-cent stamp honoring Mannerheim. The highest Finnish military award is called the Mannerheim Cross, which was awarded with the title of the Knight. 191 soldiers received that honor. It belongs to the Order of the Cross of Liberty. Here we have Crosses of Liberty, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th class. Entering the World War II. The rise of the communism and opposing national ideologies like Nazism and fascism caused increasing tensions in Europe almost immediately after the World War I. These tensions intensified during the 1930s. Spanish Civil War was fought from 1936 to 1939. German, Italian, and Soviet armies gained important experiences there, especially in aerial warfare. In August 1939, Germany and Soviet Union signed the so-called Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression pact with a secret protocol, which defined the borders of Soviet and German spheres of influence across Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. Russia had free hands with Finland. 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland and the World War II commenced. The Soviet Union forced the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, to sign mutual assistance pacts that stipulated stationing Soviet troops in these countries. But soon after, significant Soviet military contingents were moved there. Finland refused to sign a similar pact and rejected ceding part of its territory to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union invaded Finland on 13th of November 1939 under the pretext of a false flag operation, shelling of Mainila. Soviet Union claimed that Finnish artillery had shelled the Soviet village of Mainila, killing 4 and injuring 9 border guards. The Winter War started with an extensive aerial bombardment campaign launched on Finnish cities and towns. Finnish fighters were scrambled to intercept bombing sorties already on the first day of the war, but it was only on the following day when the first aerial combats took place. Field Marshal Mannerheim was appointed Commander-in-Chief of Finnish Defence Forces at the age of 72. He would stay in that position throughout the World War II. The winter was extremely cold, as temperature fell as low as -40 degrees Celsius, that equals -45 degrees in Fahrenheit. Conditions were rather challenging for the offensive Soviets because the border area was simply a vast forested area with only few roads and plenty of deep snow everywhere. Long hours of darkness didn't help either. Despite superior military strength in men, 3-1, and even much more so in artillery, tanks, and aircraft, the Soviet Union suffered severe losses and initially made little headway. For 2 months, Finnish army was able to stop the Soviet offensive on all fronts, and by using methods of guerrilla warfare, and especially the so-called Motti tactics, even managed to destroy entire Soviet divisions. Finns isolated numerically superior Soviet forces into smaller portions and then dealt with them individually and attacked them from all sides. Battle of Raate Road near Suomussalmi is the most famous battle of the Winter War. Snow-camouflaged Finnish ski troops played a major role there, as the Soviets, with their tanks and their trucks in long columns, were restricted to the use of roads. White death literally surrounded them everywhere. Okay, let's say in frozen hell. Soviet Union started a major offensive on 11th of February 1940 on the Karelian Isthmus with 460,000 soldiers, 3,350 artillery pieces, 3,000 tanks and 1,300 aircraft. Opposing them, the Finns had 150,000 exhausted soldiers, practically no tanks, no anti-tank guns, and not enough ammunition for the artillery. Under attack, Finland received plenty of international interest and sympathy, but not too much of actual help. Material help kind of arrived many times too late. Finno-Soviet War lasted just 105 days and ended on 13th of March 1940, all things considered, with minimal Finnish concessions. Parts of the Karelia and Salla regions were annexed by the Soviet Union after the Winter War. Here you can see the number of casualties in the Winter War. So the ratio was 1-5 in favor of Finland. And aerial warfare in the Winter War. At the beginning of the war, Finland had a small air force with only 121 aircraft fit for duty. We had 18 Bristol Blenheim bombers, which were pretty fast, but only with a kind of small bomb load. We had 45 fighters, 35 Fokker, and 10 Bristol Bulldog fighters, and Fokker was not deemed suitable for dogfight maneuvers because it was not very agile and not fast enough. But it was quite capable of intercepting enemy bombers. It was reasonably good in climbing and diving, especially when equipped with Bristol Mercury engine. orders were that dogfights with the enemy fighters should be avoided. And then we had also like 58 different liaison and reconnaissance aircraft and obsolete old fighters. For comparison, the Soviets had a strength of 3,250 planes, and a kind of nasty surprise for the Finns was that the Finnish fighters had difficulties to catch the fast Soviet bombers. Finnish pilots had a very good training, but many of their aircraft were really old-fashioned and obsolete, like Bristol Bulldog and Hawker Hart. But the tactics were really good. The Finnish Air Force had already adopted the four-finger formation before the war. And Fokker D-21, seen on the picture here, was the most important Finnish fighter type in the Winter War. This fighter and Fokker C-10 dive bomber and Bristol Blenheim bomber were manufactured in Finland under license. The Finns received shipments of British, French, Italian, Swedish and American aircraft. Swedish volunteers of F-19 Aviation Regiment with Gloucester Gladiators played a major role in the north, helping to defend northern part of Finland. In spite of losses, the number of planes in the Finnish Air Force rose by the end of the war, when 297 planes were in inventory, of which 225 were in operational condition. Finnish Air Force had then 30 Gloucester Gladiators, 25 Gloucester Gauntlets, 12 Hawker Hurricanes, and 6 Caudron C-174. But these Caudron planes, they were grounded immediately as they were dangerous to use. Okay, basically because of they had a very high landing speed and it was not suitable for Finnish airstrips and airfields. And we had 30 Morane Saulnier MS-406 fighters and 35 Fiat G50. And then we had also 44 Brewster Buffaloes, the Brewster Model 239 F2A1. But the Brewsters arrived too late to see any action in the Winter War. Okay, Fiat and Morane, they also saw kind of minimal amount of action in the Winter War, but they saw at least some. But I will tell more about the Brewster fighter later. I will then tell shortly about the Soviet Air Force in the Winter War as well. The main body of Soviet fighters consisted of Polikarpov I-153 Chaika and Polikarpov I-16 Rata planes, which were plenty. And so was Polikarpov I-15 BIS, either with wheels or skis. Polikarpov's general purpose biplane PO-2 and reconnaissance bomber R-5 were also used a lot. The main bombers were Tupolev SP-2M, here bombing the Finnish territory in Lagoda, Karelia, and Ilyushin TB-3M. And Finns managed to capture 5 of these in the Winter War. And what happened then in mid-air? Finnish fighter pilots often flew their planes into Soviet formations that outnumbered them 10 or even 20 times. The Finns always attacked no matter how many enemy planes there were. Actually, they had no choice. Mostly the fighters were intercepting the enemy bombers, but also many dogfights took place. The new, more modern fighters like Morane Saulnier and Fiat G50 made it possible to engage the enemy fighters in a dogfight. In the Winter War, Finnish Air Force losses were 72 dead, 22 wounded, 47 planes were lost. Soviet Air Force losses were, depending on the sources, 207 to 280 planes shot down by fighters, and anti-aircraft destroyed further 314 planes. Here we have a list of the highest scoring Finnish fighter pilots and the only 10 aces of the Winter War. Lieutenant Jorma Sarvanto is obviously an undisputed winner here, but there is plenty of good competition. Just to keep in mind, these victories were scored during the 105 days of the Winter War, with a handful of mostly obsolete fighters. Lieutenant Jorma Sarvanto. On 6th of January 1940, 17 Soviet Ilyushin DB-3 bombers took off in Estonia and headed for Finnish town Kuopio. The bomber formation split in two. The group of 8 bombers lost one plane shot down on their way to Kuopio, but their luck totally ran out on their way back when they met Lieutenant Sarvanto's Fokker in midair. In just 4 minutes, Sarvanto shot down 6 bombers. The last remaining bomber got away because Sarvanto had used all his .30 caliber ammunition he had. This was a treat never seen before, a kind of world record, and it attracted a lot of international attention. Sarvanto was the leading Finnish ace in the Winter War, with 12 and 5/6 victories, and went on to score 4 victories more in the continuation war, before he was assigned to headquarters duties and didn't fly any sorties. Sergeant Major Oiva Tuominen is the leading Finnish biplane ace with 3.5 victories scored flying with the Gloster Gladiator in the Winter War. He went on to score 36 victories more in the continuation war and was awarded the Mannerheim Cross that is shown here next to his picture. And to explain these half victories or 5/6, they are counted from the shared victories, and they were shared pretty precisely. I mean, 1/6 and so on. But usually half a victory means that there are 2 pilots that had done more or less the same effort bringing down the enemy. 19.5 victories ace Sergeant Major Victor Pyötsiä was a fatherly figure, but he was also a highly effective fighter pilot with Fokker. Lieutenant Tatu Huhanantti scored 6 victories. He was one of the few aces killed in action in the Winter War. Actually, I know only one other ace that was killed in action in Winter War. His Fokker was the only Finnish fighter equipped with 20mm wing cannons at the start of the war. Lieutenant Olli Puhakka was among the first Finnish pilots to score aerial victories with Fiat in the Winter War. This picture is actually showing Puhakka's Fiat fighter in the continuation war color. I mean the red band and the red spinner and so on. Yellow band and the yellow nose are the markings for the continuation war. And here we have Major Gustav Magnusson, who was a squadron commander in the Winter War and also great developer of Finnish fighter tactics before the war. He scored 4 victories in the Winter War and 1.5 in the Continuation War. And then about Continuation War in general. The Continuation War began 15 months after the end of the Winter War on 25th of June 1941, when Soviet Union bombed Finnish territory. This was pretty much in conjunction with the onset of Operation Barbarossa, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union, when Finland clearly aligned with Germany. This time Finland was ready for war. Through alliance with Germany, this was possible. The table had turned since the times of the Winter War. Attempts for an alliance with Sweden had again proved fruitless, and Finland did not have any realistic alternatives to cooperating with Germany at the time. After the outbreak of hostilities, Finnish armed forces started an offensive, and by September 1941, Finland had reversed its post-Winter War concessions to the Soviet Union by retaking the Karelian Isthmus and Ladoga Karelia. The Finnish army continued the offensive past the pre-1939 border with the conquest of East Karelia. Commander-in-Chief of Finnish Defense Forces, Field Marshal Mannerheim, was not very fond of Germans and kept relations with their high command as formal as possible. He also decided that Finns will not take part in the siege of Leningrad, the second biggest city in the Soviet Union. The conflict soon stabilized into trench warfare. Aerial warfare was pretty active though. About this picture here, it is taken in Tali-Ihantala in July 1944 during the Soviet major offensive. This time the trench warfare was just a memory. This was something else. 9th of June 1944, the Soviet Union launched a major offensive. The attack drove the Finns from most of the territories they had gained during the war, but the Finnish army halted the massive offensive in August. How this was possible? I will come to that. The man walking past the destroyed Soviet T-34 tank is carrying a German Panzerfaust, a single-shot recoilless anti-tank gun, which was very effective when used at close range. That same man is also sporting a Finnish submachine gun, Suomi KP-31, which was one of the finest weapons of the World War II. It had an approximately 12.3-inch long barrel, which helped to achieve 400 meters per second muzzle velocity and lethal range of approximately 200 meters. It had a 900 rounds per minute rate of fire, so it was a very effective weapon. The Finnish artillery, masterminded by General of Artillery Vilho Nenonen, was able to concentrate fire exceptionally well into a devastating effect which surpassed all the other artilleries in the world at the time. The fire correction circle, developed in 1943, proved decisive in the defensive victory in the Battle of Tali-Ihantala in July 1944, and was made standard equipment of the Finnish artillery by an order issued by Nenonen already in July 1943. The trajectory calculation formulas he developed are still in use today by all modern artillery. German military support was of paramount importance in helping Finns to halt the offensive. This support was mainly material like Sturmgeschütz Type 3 tanks shown here, anti-tank weapons like Panzerfaust, and aircraft, but also very important troops contribution, most importantly in the form of Detachment Kuhlmai. Detachment Kuhlmai's Stuka dive bombers and Junkers Ju-88 bombers did an amazing job as a kind of flying artillery. That combined with the extremely accurate and efficient Finnish artillery fire, the Finns were many times able to completely wipe out the advancing Soviet spearheads in the early stages of each Soviet attempt to make a decisive strike. After resisting a major Soviet offensive in June-July 1944 led to a standstill, Finland reached an armistice with the Soviet Union. This was followed by the Lapland War of 1944 to 1945, when Finland fought retreating German forces in the northern Finland. Terms of peace treaty were heavy. Finland had to cede more territory than in 1940 and pay huge reparations. On the other hand, Finland remained independent and was not occupied by Soviet troops. Finland managed to stay on the better side of the Iron Curtain, the free Western world, but the price was high. Finnish casualties were 63,200 dead and 158,000 wounded. Soviet casualties, on the other hand, were, depending on the sources, from 201,000 to 305,000 dead and 385,000 wounded. So the ratio was approximately 1-4 in favor of Finland, if you let me compare like that. Aerial warfare in the continuation war. This is the Finnish ace Hans Wind standing on the wing of his Brewster fighter. And here we have highly skilled Finnish bomber pilots and observers who were also the Knights of the Mannerheim Cross. A couple of words about the aviation art paintings I have used in my presentation. They are painted by various artists like Sture Gripenberg, Kari Virtanen and Antti Salminen from Finland, Shigeo Koike from Japan, Takayoshi Wada, I believe from Japan as well, T. Kurokawa, Jaroslav Vröbel, Nicolas Trudkian, Carlos Alonso, Jerry Boucher, Roy Cross, Wojciech Sankowski, Douglas Carrick, Ian Willie, Stan Hayek, to name a few. There are more. And this is something else. During the interim peace, Finland prepared for the worst-case scenario by increasing the aircraft production and also repairing plenty of captured Soviet planes to be used by Finnish Air Force. When the fighting started, Finland had 550 planes ready for duty. There was in the inventory 50 Fokker D-21s. Well, they were old-fashioned, had weak armament, and they were slow. We had 30 Gloster Gladiators. They had a good flying characteristics, but were old-fashioned and too slow either. Sorry, I'll get the picture back. And we had 35 Fiat G50. They had excellent flying characteristics. They were pretty fast, but the maintenance was kind of difficult. They had a reasonably good armament of 250 cal Breda machine guns, and surprisingly, Fiat had a phenomenal victory ratio, 44-1. So only 2 Fiats were lost in fighting, and 88 Soviet planes were shot down. So that's the highest victory ratio in Finnish Air Force. And we had 25 Morane Saunier MS-406 bought from German stock of captured planes. And altogether Finns had 87 of Morane Sauniers. And Morane Saunier was well-handling but seriously underpowered plane with a weak and unreliable armament. And it was completely outdated already in 1942, and losses were building up. And I believe the victory ratio was still as high as 8-1. And there was 28 Curtiss Hawk 75As purchased from Germany. So they were captured by Germans. They had good flying characteristics, but were too slow. Updated armament was kind of adequate, and Curtiss had a victory ratio as high as 13.5-1. It was loved by the pilots because it was really good to fly. Finnish Air Force captured 2 single-seat I-16 fighters and 1 trainer, UTI-4 trainer, that is on display at the Finnish Aviation Museum in Vantaa. But these Polycarpovs, they were not used in combat. But Polycarpov I-153, though that was used in combat quite a lot, it was very agile. It was good in climbing, but it was too slow. Polycarpov I-15 BIS, on the other hand, had a good flying characteristics, but it was old-fashioned and way too slow, and it was used mainly as a trainer. And there were also some short takeoff and landing type of planes that were used for liaison flights. We had 2 Fieseler Storchs and 12 Westland Lysanders. But, however, when the fighting started, the most important fighter for the Finns was definitely Brewster Buffalo. We had 44 of them. Originally, it was a carrier-based fighter aircraft. Model 239 aircraft sold to Finland had its flight instruments, gun sight, armament, cockpit armor, and all the carrier use equipment removed before delivery. This resulted in an improved power-to-weight ratio and thus much better performance. It was actually a much better fighter than its later, heavier versions, which have a more powerful engine, but the weight was really a killer. So this kind of a stripped off Brewster was actually very agile and wonderful plane. It was pretty fast, good in climbing, and the low wing loading meant good maneuverability. It was easy and very forgiving to fly. It was rugged and reliable. It had a good armament of 4 50 cal machine guns, good visibility from the cockpit, and a very good range. And the pilots, they just loved it. It performed very well up to mid-1943 when compared to Soviet planes. And Brewster had an amazing victory ratio of 32-1. The other main fighter types were already mentioned: Fiat G50 and Curtiss Hawk 75 and Morane Saunier MS-406. Morane Saunier was updated by installing a more powerful Soviet Klimov 1100 horsepower engine from captured Soviet aircraft. Improved plane was called Mörkö-Morane, a boogie Morane. It was much faster and it was climbing better. Finns captured 3 Soviet LAK-3 fighters, but they saw only little action. Finns managed to capture only one Curtiss P-40M Warhawk. It was only flown to get familiar with that type. This was a lend and lease aircraft. Hurricanes purchased from England during the Winter War saw action only in the Continuation War. Finland, now an Axis nation, couldn't get the spares for them anymore, so the number of operational planes was insignificantly low. Later, starting from the spring of 1943, Finland was able to buy Messerschmitt fighters from Germany. In spring 1943, 30 Messerschmitt Bf 109G2 types were bought, and in spring 1944, 30 Bf 109G6 types were bought. And the deal was really good because the Germans replaced all lost aircraft, whatever the cause. All lost aircraft were replaced with the new ones. So eventually 159 Bf 109 fighters were received. Bf 109 was light, fast, agile, and well armed. It was not very good in a dogfight because the higher wing loading meant poorer turning ability, but it was excellent in climbing and pretty good in diving. Powerful engine combined with a small frame and narrow landing gear made it difficult to control in taking off and landing. Victory ratio was 25-1. Okay, if you compare it to Fiat or Brewster, it's not really a fair comparison because Messerschmitt was really put in the fire in 1944, and it was totally different ball game than, let's say, 42 and 43. And German Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring donated 15 Dornier Do 17 bombers to Finland, and Germany sold Finland 24 Junkers Ju-88A4 bombers. Junkers was the most modern bomber type used by the Finns. Bristol Blenheim was the most numerous bomber type. We had 97 planes altogether. Finns also had plenty of captured Soviet bombers in use, like 22 Tupolev SP-2s and 8 Petyakov PE-2s, and also 15 Ilyushin DB-3, not shown here. State Aircraft Factory, Valtion lentokonetehdas. Finland also had some indigenous aircraft design and production. VL Humu is a Finnish version of Brewster with a wooden wing. Only one prototype was made. It's on display in the Finnish Museum. And VL Myrsky, which means storm, hence the title of this presentation as well. This was entirely Finnish design with Pratt & Whitney twin wasp engine. 51 aircraft were made. They saw only little action and only a couple of aerial victories were scored with them. Myrsky had a fuselage with a tubular steel structure and a wooden wing. It had problems with glue joints thanks to the low quality glue used and the harsh Finnish weather conditions. Nevertheless, after Messerschmitt, Myrsky was the fastest plane used by the Finns. Top speed was 335 miles per hour. And Myrsky also had a good flying characteristic and a decent armament of 4 50 cal machine guns. There's a restoration project going on in Finland and it should be finished by 2021. VL pyörremyrsky, which means tornado in Finnish. This was a mainly wooden prototype with a very powerful Daimler DB605 engine. Only one was made, and maiden flights took place after the war in November 1945. Pyörremyrsky was turning and climbing better than Messerschmitt, but it was slightly slower with a top speed of 388 miles per hour. Its much wider landing gear setup was better suited for the rather poor airfield conditions in Finland. Shortly about the Soviet Air Force in the continuation war. Polikarpov I-153 Chaika and Polikarpov I-16 Rata were still actively used in 1942 and 1943. But they were badly beaten by Finnish Brewsters. But more modern planes like Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-3 and different types of Yakolev Yak fighters were really taking over Polikarpovs. Lavochin Gorbunov Gudkov LAK-3 saw lots of action, as did its successor, Lavochin LA-5. And of course, Ilyushin IL-2 Sturmovik, the famous heavily armored ground attack plane, was used in big numbers. And so was excellent multi-purpose bomber Petyakov PE-2. Soviets also had plenty of Tupolev and Ilyushin bombers and Lisunov LIT transport planes in use. Not to mention the substantial number of planes provided to the Soviet Union through Lend and Lease program, altogether approximately 18,000 aircraft. North American B-25J Mitchell is shown here. And here we have Bell B-39 Air Cobra, and here Curtiss B-40, Supermarine Spitfire, Hawker Hurricane, and Douglas A-20 Boston bomber. This table shows 15 highest scoring Finnish fighter aces and the number of their aerial victories. Table also shows how many victories were scored with each type of aircraft. Altogether, there are 96 Finnish aces. In the continuation war, Finnish Air Force shot down, depending on sources, 1,621 to 1,855 Soviet planes. Finnish Air Force lost 257 planes in combat and 215 in accidents. Also in training, approximately 100 planes were lost. The success of Finnish pilots in the winter and continuation wars has been attributed to a number of reasons. Considered as one of the key factors in this was the development of air combat tactics and air defense command and control commenced in the 1930s by Colonel Richard Lawrence and Colonel Gustav Magnusson and continued during the war. This work was regarded as highly progressive even by international standards. The most prominent Finnish fighter ace is, without a doubt, Sergeant Major Ilmari Juutilainen. Sergeant Major Ilmari Juutilainen, the highest scoring Finnish fighter ace and also the highest scoring non-German fighter ace in the world, with 94 confirmed aerial victories. In general, the aerial victories claimed by the Finns are very accurately documented, and later studies has proved them to be correct, and thus they are largely approved by the historians. Juutilainen was awarded the coveted Mannerheim Cross twice. Only one other pilot, the second highest scoring ace, Captain Hans Wind, had it awarded twice. These two pilots were quite different while in action in the sky. Juutilainen was considering tactician, always pursuing to have the best advantage when engaging the enemy. Hans Wind, on the other hand, was famous for always rushing into combat without too much of caution or the best possible angle of strike, and it paid him dearly. Juutilainen scored 34 victories with Brewster and 58 victories with Messerschmitt. He also scored 2 victories with Fokker in the Winter War. The enemy fighter never fired a single hit on Juutilainen's plane. Only once he had to make an emergency landing due to damage from friendly anti-aircraft fire. He was never wounded either. A good runner-up is Captain Hans Wind. He was the second highest scoring Finnish fighter ace with 75 confirmed victories, and he was also the recipient of the Mannerheim Cross awarded twice. Wind is also the world's leading ace on Brewster with 39 victories on that type. His last victory with Brewster came as late as on the 21st March 1944, when the top ace Ilmari Juutilainen had already 24 victories with Messerschmitt. So Captain Wind started kinda late with Messerschmitt, but still managed to shoot down 36 enemy planes with his Messerschmitt before getting seriously wounded in a battle during the Soviet major offensive on 28th of June 1944. Hans Wind shot down 2 IL-2 Sturmovik ground attack planes earlier that day. Then his flight was attacked by 20 Yak-9 fighters, of which he managed to shoot down 3 before another Yak-9 got some hits on his plane. He was seriously wounded on his left arm. He managed to break free from combat and return to his home base, landing flawlessly before fainting out. He spent the rest of the war in a military hospital. Thanks to his 5 victories that day, he was the leading Finnish ace for 2 days before Ilmari Juutilainen retook that position. Hans Wind was a daredevil pilot, not exactly reckless, but not too careful either. He was always very eager to start a fight, and he would not wait to get the best position to attack or advantage over the opponent. His straightforward tactics of attacking numerically even 10 to 20 times larger enemy formations without hesitation often confused the opponents and eventually gave him the advantage over them. Many times he returned with the new victory bars to be added to the tail fin of his shot-up plane. 56 victories ace Major Eino Luukkanen was the third highest scoring Finnish fighter pilot. He was the flight commander at the outbreak of the Winter War and went on to command a squadron in the Continuation War. He flew the highest number of sorties in the Finnish Air Force, scoring 39 victories with Messerschmitt. Warrant Officer Urho Little Giant Lehtovaara scored 15 victories with Morane Saulnier, making him the leading Finnish ace on that type. He was also very successful with Messerschmitt, amassing 29.5 victories. The Winter War veteran Sergeant Major Oiva Tuominen scored 44 victories, of which 36 in the Continuation War. He is the world's leading ace on Fiat G50 with 23 victories scored with the type. He also scored 13 victories with Messerschmitt. Oiva was the first Knight of the Mannerheim Cross in the Finnish Air Force. 42 victories ace Captain Olli Puhakka shot down 13 enemy planes with Fiat and 25 planes with Messerschmitt. He was considered to be the most skilled aviator in the Finnish Air Force. First Lieutenant Olavi Puro shot down his first 2 enemy aircraft with this Polikarpov I-153 while on duty in Marine Reconnaissance Patrolling late 1942. In April 1943, he returned to the fighter unit, which was equipped with Brewster. During the Soviet major offensive in June 1944, Puro was wounded in the battle on the 28th of June. Only 11 days later, he returned to his unit. His leg is still in the plaster bandage. Next day, he shot down 4 Soviet planes. He might have thought it was a payback time. Puro wasn't awarded the Mannerheim Cross. That's a pity because he really earned it. This is the aircraft of Sergeant First Class Nils Katajainen. He was the only reservist fighter pilot to receive Mannerheim Cross. He scored 35.5 victories. Flight Commander Lieutenant Lauri Lapra Nissinen was killed in action on 17th June 1944 during the Soviet major offensive, when his comrades shot a plane, a Messerschmitt, fell through the clouds on his plane. Nissinen was at the time only starting to get things going with the Messerschmitt. His earlier score with Brewster stood at impressive 22.5 victories. Captain Kössi Karhila was a young and a talented reservist pilot who scored his first victory flying Curtiss Hawk in August 1941. Oddly enough, he wasn't awarded the Mannerheim Cross. Flight Commander Captain Jorma Karhunen, a Winter War veteran, scored 26.5 victories with Brewster. In 1943, after he was promoted major, he was appointed a squadron commander and he didn't fly sorties anymore. This Curtiss Hawk belongs to Major Auvo Maunula. He was a flight commander in the Winter War and a squadron commander in the Continuation War. He was killed in a training accident in June 1944. Sergeant Major Eino Koskinen was a prominent Curtiss Hawk ace. He also managed to score 1 victory with captured Lavochin Lak 3 fighter. Also, Finnish bomber pilots and observers were awarded the Mannerheim Cross for extraordinary achievements and bravery. The Winter War veteran Major Birger Ek was the first Finnish submarine hunter pilot. He is credited with inventing and refining the method of dropping naval depth charges from aircraft. He was first guy in the world to invent that. He was personally involved in the sinking of 4 submarines. Highly successful bomber pilot Captain Tauno Iisalo flew with Bristol Blenheim and Junkers Tu-88 bombers, but he also flew some non-combat missions with Petyakov PE-2 bomber. PE-2 was an excellent multi-purpose aircraft with good handling and speed. This Dornier Do 17 is the personal mount of Sergeant Major Viljo Salminen, already an older gentleman and a deserving Winter War veteran, who was the first Knight of the Mannerheim Cross among the Finnish Air Force bomber pilots. Dornier was a nice plane to fly, but too slow. A truly fearless bomber pilot, Sergeant Major Unto Oksala flew many remote bombing and reconnaissance missions, which were deemed to be the most dangerous type of missions among the bomber crews. Oksala often volunteered to fly them as opposed to many others who rather not do them at all. Earlier I mentioned about the Detachment Kuhlmai, a German Luftwaffe temporary unit that was formed and sent to Finland for helping Finns to counter the Soviet major offensive in the summer of 1944. Erich Rudorfer, a holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, was the most prominent German fighter ace that took part in the fighting on the Karelian Isthmus. Rudorfer scored 5 victories in Tali-Ihantala. Another high-profile German ace in Tali-Ihantala was 157 victories ace Gerhard Tüben, who scored 11 victories in Tali-Ihantala. I will conclude my presentation with the story of one particular aircraft, a Brewster fighter with the designation BW372, a personal mount of a notable fighter ace Lauri Pekuri. On 25th of June 1942, Pekuri's group of 4 Brewsters and another group of 4 Brewsters were in combat with about 10 Soviet Hurricanes. 7 Hurricanes were shot down, 2 of them by Pekuri. During this combat, Pekuri's Brewster was hit and he had to ditch his burning plane in Lake Iso-Kolejärvi in eastern Karelia. Having almost burned and drowned in the process, he managed to swim to a shore and to walk 13 miles back to the Finnish lines. His wingman was also shot down, but he too managed to make his way back after 2 days and 60 miles of walking in the woods. In the 1990s, a Finnish fighter ace, Hemmo Leino, suggested the search operation for Pekuri's plane. Finno-Russian search team went on to look for the lost aircraft for the American National Museum of Naval Aviation. After 4 years of extensive search operations in Russian Karelia, BW372 was discovered in June 1998 and salvaged in August same year. After some colorful events, it ended up in Ireland in December 1998 and finally arrived to the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida in 2004. In 2008, the museum agreed to loan the fighter to the Aviation Museum of Central Finland in Tikkakoski. BW372 will stay there at least until 2022. It is the only complete Brewster fighter in existence. It has been restored to the condition in which it was when lifted from the water, thoroughly cleaned and much of the damage from the forced landing repaired, but not fully rebuilt. Tikkakoski Museum has a pretty nice collection of historical military aircraft on display. It's well worth visiting, so be most welcome to Finland. This concludes my briefing. Thank you for watching and listening.
Well, Juha, thank you very, very much for your presentation this evening. I think we've all enjoyed it. judging by all the questions here, we're going to keep you up just a little bit later, and I hope that's okay.
It's okay.
So you'll have to forgive us. It's not often that here in the United States we're familiar with the phrase "prominent Curtiss Hawk ace," but it seems that there were incredible accomplishments by Finnish aviators across the board flying, what were considered obsolete or obsolescent aircraft at the time. You hit a little bit on their use of tactics to kind of even the odds in their favor. Can you talk a little bit about how Finnish pilots were trained, maybe extending before the war, and then how they were trained during the war with Soviet aircraft kind of so close to those training fields?
Well, I'm not a specialist about this issue really, but I have some idea how this Finnish training was so especially good. And I think one of the main reasons is that I already told this indigenous aircraft production. So we also had our own trainer aircraft manufactured. It was our own design. And now I don't remember actually the name, but it was, VL Pyry. And it turned out to be not too easy plane to fly. So the cadets who were training fighter tactics and flying all the maneuvers and stuff like that, they had to fly this plane, which was rather challenging to fly. So it turned out that they were trained really good pilots. They were, really, really skillful. And this tactics, the father of Finnish Air Force is this Colonel Richard Lawrence, and also Major Gustafsson. They were both familiar about the developments in, let's say Spanish Civil War, and the Germans already adopted the four-finger formation. So they had a clue about that, and they also, I think they already figured out themselves that this 3 planes or 2 planes combinations is not, or actually at least the 3 planes combination is not very flexible and good. So the either 2 or 4 planes, and this four-finger formation was a really, really brilliant idea, and they kind of made the same conclusions as the Germans. And I think the training and the development was also kind of progressive as the war went on. So, for example, when the Brewsters were kind of getting a little bit outdated already, so the MiG-3 was like 200 kilometers per hour faster, and some other types were Soviet types were already much faster. So they have to kind of countermeasures to be able to beat the Soviet much faster, more developed fighter types. So I think also the American fighters, they started to use, I don't know what is actually the correct term, but I would say like a pendulum tactics against the Japanese Mitsubishi Zeros, which were way too agile to kind of compete with the terms of that were good for the Mitsubishi. And I guess also the same, I call it pendulum tactics, that or swinging tactics were used against the German pilots. For example, the B-47 Thunderbolt it was not really that agile. It was not good in climbing and so on. So, but was it? I don't remember.
I think you're describing the thatch weave. Is that where the airplanes kind of overlap one another in hopes of lining the hostile aircraft up into the gun sights of the other airplane?
Yeah. I believe that that's probably correct. And one other thing that Finns started to use is like two planes fly lower altitude, and the others are kind of watching over them from the higher altitude. And the lower guys are kind of a bait that will draw the attention of the Soviet fighters, and then they will use kind of a surprise element and so on. So they were really developing the countermeasures because the Soviets were getting better and better. I mean, also the pilots, Soviet pilots, were getting better as the war went on, and definitely their aircraft was getting actually the later type of Lavochin and I would say mainly Lavochin and Yakolev Yak 3, and so they were actually better than Messerschmitt in many ways.
Thank you for answering that one. A lot of the questions that folks are asking you are about the operational challenges of the environment. You mentioned that Finnish airfields are kind of rough in a lot of cases. There's kind of extremes of conditions too, from the freezing cold of the winter and in the far north of Finland, but it also turns to kind of like tundra and in the summertime swamp, I think. Can you describe for us how the Finnish Air Force was able to overcome just the basic operational challenges of the environment?
I wish I knew, but yeah, Finland is mostly just forested areas. So, and lots of swamps as well, but the swamps are not available for these operations. Maybe during the very cold winter, if this kind of wet area is completely frozen and it's flat enough, but usually those swamp areas, when they are frozen, they are not really flat, they are bumpy. I mean, it's not even enough to be used as a temporary airstrip or so. But during the winters, the Finnish lakes are frozen, so winter time, the ice of the lakes were used as temporary airstrips, and maybe also some fields. But we had also kind of air bases or so, but that's really too much to say, because practically there were not many places where Finnish Air Force has any hangars. So the planes were in open without any cover, so they had to be camouflaged and pushed between the trees and so on, so not to be detected by the enemy reconnaissance and stuff like that. So it was really primitive conditions. Finland wasn't really that wealthy country way back then, and thanks to politics and so on, so maybe some politicians were thinking that we don't need any guns. It's so good that we didn't spend any money to buy guns because nobody's threatening us. And they were wrong, but so si vis pacem parabellum, that's a good phrase still. So yeah, the conditions were really primitive.
So it sounds like really as much as we are discussing the accomplishments of the pilots, simply keeping the airplanes flying is an accomplishment of its own for the ground crew, and that it took just an incredible amount of ingenuity to find ways to do this. I think that kind of goes along with keeping an Air Force made up of captured airplanes, purchased airplanes, left behind airplanes, and of more than a dozen different types. Obviously, keeping all those airplanes serviced was a massive undertaking as well.
Yeah, it's fair to say that those mechanics, the technical crew, they were really magicians. They did amazing things in a very, very hard conditions. Harsh, I mean, snow, very cold temperature, and okay, or then again, kind of a low temperatures with the freezing rainfall and stuff like that. And the winter time, the daylight hours are kind of short, so there are plenty of challenges. And okay, we had a kind of a motley crew of big selection of various different types of airplanes. And if we had like only one, like 10 planes of certain type, it was very, very difficult to keep it running. I mean, you have to strip some plane to get spares for the others and so on. So eventually you don't have that aircraft in service anymore. But then again, when we had more planes, so of a certain type, it made sense to start our own manufacturing of spares. And that's already a kind of a miracle in those wartime conditions. And also the crew that was taking care of the airstrips. I mean, the winter time, it's not sufficient that, okay, here is a flat area, go ahead and take off. No, they have to trample or flatten the snow, get it very, very dense so that it can carry the load of the wheels and so on. So, or blow the extensive snow away to make a runway for the planes to take off. And camouflage, because the enemy had always a kind of a complete control of the area because of the number of the planes they had in use. So it was really challenging thing. But okay, Finland is a rather big country and very sparsely populated and mostly forested areas. So some might think that there is nothing to see, and okay, it's not easy to see anything there, but there are some people that are really willing to fight for their country and make it very difficult for the enemy to try to occupy the area.
Did they surely supplying ammunition became an interesting problem to the range of different aircraft types. Did Finland have an internal ability to produce aircraft armament? Did they kind of re-equip these airplanes with their own weapons and therefore have supply chain for their own ammunition? Or were they constantly trying to source different sizes of rounds and everything else? Do you know?
Actually, I'm not sure, because many of these fighter types, like Brewster and Curtis, and also VL Myrsky, they had Colt 50 cal machine gun, heavy machine guns installed. I don't know where Finland actually got them. Maybe arms dealing is still available from international market or whatever. I'm not sure about that. Or then again, it might be that Finland was able to buy them from German stock of captured things and stuff like that. But there was also Finnish indigenous armament production, actually very good quality of production, and we also had our own, if I remember right, 50 cal version of heavy machine gun, and definitely the Finnish version of 30 cal machine guns. But okay, the 30 cal was not really sufficient after, let's say, 42 or so. It was not biting enough, so the 50 cal was definitely what was needed. 50 cal or 20 millimeter cannons, and I think Finland was more or less able to produce the ammunition for them, but then again, I think we bought everything from Germany that was available for us as well.
We've got a couple questions here about the nature of the relationship with Nazi Germany. So, for instance, there were Hungarians and Italian units engaged on the Eastern Front as aviators, kind of at the behest of Nazi Germany. Was Finland able to avoid this? Was Mannerheim able to keep his troops focused there in Finland, or were Finnish pilots also taken to other theaters of the Axis war effort?
No, we were not taking part. Actually, our only Finnish troop contribution to Operation Barbarossa, I mean, apart from the Russian Karelia or the Soviet Karelia, Finland sent voluntary force. I mean, it was completely voluntary force to join German army, but it turned out to be that they were actually joining the SS, Waffen SS, and wait. Now I have to remember this SS Viking. The Finnish troops, they were like, if I remember right, 1,300 or so. They joined this SS Viking and fought part of that from, I would say, late 1941 to, let's say, early 1943. But then Mannerheim or the Finns decided that they will take our own men back because, okay, obviously we were seeing already that the Germans would probably lose the war. And there was Stalingrad catastrophe already happened. That was a clear signal. And okay, we knew that we will need every force and every man that we have. So they were called back. And because we were volunteering in this SS division, that's on the contrary on the other kind of Axis nations that were, okay, let's say more or less occupied by Germany. They were not really volunteering. They were asked to do that. So that was a kind of different, but those were only infantry troops that were fighting in, this is that Caucasus Mountains in approximately the area of Georgia. That's the furthest place where the Finnish troops that were fighting in the Waffen SS went before they were pulled back to Finland.
Were there any foreign pilots or volunteers who joined up with the Finnish Air Force? I think we're all aware that during the Spanish Civil War, German pilots went and flew with the Condor Legion, and there was, Soviet forces involved with supplying the Republican side of Spain, and of course there's the P-40s that were supplied to China and the American volunteer group, better known as the Flying Tigers. There were plenty of people seeking to volunteer to kind of fight in different theaters and gain air combat experience before the war. Was there any such equivalent program? Did American pilots, British pilots leave and go fight in Finland?
I think some men volunteered to fight for Finland. Mostly, I guess, like just infantrymen. But there is one curiosity: the Canadian ace, one of the greatest aces of all time, really, George Beurling. He was only 17 years old, and he wanted to volunteer to fight for the Finns in the Winter War, but his parents said no. Okay, and he was really disappointed, but he really tried to volunteer, and he wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Finnish Air Force, but that really never happened. Went any further than that. I believe there was one. I don't know if it was really a serious thing or anything, but I guess he was American officer who volunteered as a fighter pilot, and he probably flew even one or two sorties, but I think that was all about it. He then left. He was probably not fit for this Finnish weather conditions and flying in this kind of weather and planes and so on and so on. But I think I have read about one special case. But other than that, there was only this Swedish F-19 aviation regiment that was actually completely responsible for the aerial defense of the northern part of Finland during the Winter War. But then they, after the Winter War, they were not taking part of the continuation war anymore. So after that, the Finns were again on their own. But then again, there were German Luftwaffe were operating from some of the Finnish airfields. For example, the airport of Pori, which is like 50 kilometers north of Rauma, where I live. That was the biggest and the busiest military airport in Northern Europe. And that's a kind of a surprising thing, but because it was kind of a logistical hub that was connecting the most Nordic air bases of German Luftwaffe in Norway, northern Norway, where the Germans were making sorties to Murmansk area on the Soviet territory, and there were actually very heavy aerial fighting between the Germans and Soviets there in Petsamo, Murmansk area, the extreme north of Europe.
The P-40 in the museum's collection here actually was recovered battle damaged outside of the city of Murmansk. So kind of an interesting connection back here to the story. Juha, you mentioned earlier that pilots had no choice but to attack, in a sense. Finland didn't really have the luxury of choosing not to defend itself. Having previously separated from Russia, is it fair to say that Finns viewed it as a kind of a war for independence? Is that maybe a way to understand the ferocity of the defense that they put up?
Yeah, because the Civil War was really a conflict that divided the Finnish nation. Let's say half and half. The other half were for the socialism, and okay, their mistake or not, whatever, but they were kind of understanding the Soviet Union and the Bolshevik Revolution, some of them. And then again, there were the so-called white side, the more right-wing minded people of the nation. And the white side won the Civil War. and the aftermath of this conflict was nasty. It was ugly, and it left very, very deep scars in the mind of the nation. But when again the socialistic or communistic Soviet Union started threatening Finland, and actually it wasn't only threatening, they were attacking Finland. So it was an amazing thing how this nation was united behind the idea of we are defending Finland. We don't care what is your ideology or whatever. You don't come here. We defend our home and our country. So the nation was united. So the Winter War really united the Finnish people, and this resistance was really, really fierce and very, very solid. And here on this picture that is shown here, the Finnish flag. This is the flag of the Finnish Defense Forces, and you can see the coat of arms in the middle of this blue cross. This is a very old symbol, this crowned lion striking with a sword while trampling on a saber. That the saber symbolizes the Soviet, or not the Soviet, but the Russian might, and actually symbolizes the Russia. And the lion is trampling on the Russia. So it's kind of a up yours idea in this coat of arms. And when Finland was part of the Russian Empire, this coat of arms was kind of modified so that it won't have this setup of Russia is trampled under the legs of the lion of Finland. So there is a kind of a suspicion between the big neighbor and Finland always. We have to be in good relation and in friendly relations, but we have to always be kind of cautious and pay attention.
Well, I think that obviously served the nation well to have been well prepared for the Winter War. Famously, the Soviets were not prepared, and many of the changes they would ultimately make that would impact their military units and their ability to operate during World War II would come as a result of the large-scale humiliation at the hands of the Finnish forces in the Winter War. You had that concludes our program for tonight. Thank you so much for your time. We hope you get some sleep this evening. Thank you for being here with us after midnight in Finland. And you were so kind to invite all of us to come to Finland. I'm sure some of us will as soon as it's safe to travel again. And likewise, you have a standing invitation to come here to the US, and I'm sure we'd all love to see you and love to show you around the museum in person, and you could come enjoy some of the types of airplanes you were describing and see them in flight. So thank you, Juha. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keegan. I would love to come. And thank you, Victoria, as well for all the arrangements and good guidance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time and your support this evening.